This year's A Christmas Story Christmas has been presented as the official sequel to the 1983 contemporary classic A Christmas Story, despite a few other pieces of media that have come out over the last 20 to 30 years which could vie for the honor. My wife, Erin, the tie-dyed librarian, was the first member of my family to screen the new movie, which sees Ralphie Parker, now the dad in his own household, wanting to deliver the perfect Christmas to his family. My wife couldn't say enough good things about it, so I, someone who is a bit cautious about reboots and long-awaited sequels, sat down with her to take it in. It was a good movie all the way through, but I was really affected by the very, very end of the film. Please enjoy listening to my household, reflecting on A Christmas Story Christmas, and deciding what the new movie can tell all of us about ourselves. This marks the triumphant return of Erin, the tie-dyed librarian, to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, and also another recent feature of the show is here. John, you say hi.
Hi.
And we're going to be talking a little bit about A Christmas Story Christmas. I don't think we need to go through all the questions because this is a very recent movie, and it's kind of hard to tell what it says about history because it's about a month old. But watching it, I mean, we're going to skip right to the end. That's probably the most, I don't know, I get chills just thinking about the very end of A Christmas Story Christmas. Do you feel the same way about it?
Yes.
I'm glad that I have you here to elaborate on this. So,
I'm just kidding.
All right. Well, tell me a little bit.
The first time that I watched this movie, I went in, I wouldn't say reluctantly, but just kind of, with some reservations, I'm going to give it a shot and we'll see how far I get. I wanted it to be good, but like I said, I had reservations. And it didn't take long for me to get into the movie and think, this is really good. This is a very well done sequel, requel, reboot, whatever they want to call it. I guess it really is more of a sequel. It's just that right now we're in this culture of rebooting everything, and it definitely has the essence of a reboot because it's aimed at people our age who grew up watching A Christmas Story, the 24-hour marathon on TBS. Mm-hmm. It's clearly aimed at us. Right. So it has a very reboot-esque quality, although the story is not really a reboot of the original story. It's really a sequel. It takes place about 30 years after the original story, when Ralphie is an adult with his own family now.
Which is, I think the title alone is worthy of talking about because, it's called A Christmas Story Christmas, and they can't use A Christmas Story 2 because they already did that a couple years ago with, mixed results. And there was a sequel, 2 sequels to the original movie, the Ollie Hop Noodles and A Summer Story.
I remember watching A Summer Story because we had it on VHS when I was young, and it wasn't terrible, but it was hard for me to really think of it as the same universe because obviously it was much different actors. Mary Steenburgen plays the mom and Kieran Culkin plays Ralphie, and it wasn't a bad story. I just, like I said, I couldn't really picture it as the original character. I kind of just thought of it as a different story set in the same time period.
And if you're wondering what those sounds are in the background,
that's our dumb
reindeer,
dog.
Right? Is that Santa's reindeer?
No, that's our dumb dog, Coco. She's very disgusting. And
this is going out to the world, just so you know.
And I got something to say about A Christmas Story Christmas.
I wanted to ask you about that because I wanted to ask your impressions of it because you're not even 8 years old yet. So the original movie that this is based on doesn't have the same.
Yeah, there is one of my favorite parts, second movies, first and second. Mm-hmm. There's some parts that kind of match up with parts, take the Home Alone 2 when kind of in the beginning all of them are he mouse back to his mom and stuff. It's just like that sort of.
Yeah. There is quite a few parallels between the original movie and this one, but I think it separates itself enough that it's its own story. And I feel like the title of the movie is part of the material of it, because it's like when a special on a TV show would be like, you know, a Mr. Belvedere Christmas, or, you know, a special...
A Muppet Family Christmas.
A Muppet Family Christmas. Yeah, like something like that, where it's like, we know it's Christmas themed because the name of the original movie is A Christmas Story, so you don't really need to say A Christmas Story Christmas.
But it's like the Muppet Family Christmas, it's telling you that, you know, your favorite characters are going to be presenting a Christmas story for you. And although we already know that the Christmas story is about Christmas, I think it works because they did bring back all the original characters, not just like the idea of the original characters, but they brought back like all the original actors. So it's like bringing together all the Muppets and all the Fraggles and all the you know, all the Sesame Street gang. It's like all of your favorite characters from that universe are now coming together, and they got all those original actors together again.
That's such a good point. It's almost like they're an ensemble that, you know, and they're missing one key character and therefore actor, the my old man, the dad. But they do make a big effort to have the character present. Yeah, his hat's there.
I mean, they can't, you know, we can't go in a time machine and go back and stop that actor from dying because he's been gone for years now.
Well, there goes my plan for the weekend.
But, I mean, they do really put him, like, he's almost like the star of it, because the whole story is about him and keeping his memory alive.
Yeah.
So even though the actor is not here, like, my old man is almost kind of like the main character in some ways.
And there's so many, like, wires that kind of go all over the place as far as, like, on the timeline itself. So the original movie came out in 1983, which I wonder why they couldn't just wait one more year to release this one to make it a solid 40-year anniversary kind of thing. So, you know, the movie... the original one comes out 1983, and it's set about 40 years before that. So it's set in the 1940s. Ralphie is a little kid. He's dreaming of the Red Ryder BB gun. John, do you relate to Ralphie in that movie as, you know, wanting a toy really badly and going through whatever you need to do to get it?
It's kind of like the kid in this movie. It's like he wants a super fast sled, and it's just like that quality. This is my guess. I never seen the whole movie. This is my guess. He's going to get it for Christmas, and he's going to act like Ralphie did. Like, yay!
Yeah. Well, because the original movie is a kid's story. It's about a little boy, whereas the kids in this are kind of like the supporting characters, supporting actors, whereas Ralphie's still the main character of this one, which then brings us strangely on another point in the timeline. Instead of setting this movie in 1983, which would have been, I think, easy for them to do, they instead put it into the early 1970s. And so it's like kind of hard to like wrap your head around everything. Is like, you know, the Gene Shepard voice in, you know, the older Ralphie that is in the original movie. From what time period is he looking back? And that's where the ending of this kind of tells us, you know, brings it all together. All of this, I think, is pretty informative. You know, we have a tough time doing it right now because we are in the time period. We're a month out from when this movie came out, almost exactly. But say 20, 30, 40 years from now, if somebody were to look at this particular film and say, what does this tell us about 2022? I think just those facts alone will say a lot about, you know, we really, and you've mentioned it before, we love our reboots, we love our revisiting of stories, but they have to be done right.
I am a huge fan of reboots and sequels and requels. I will give pretty much any one of them a chance. Some of them are very well done. Even some of the ones that you wouldn't really expect to be well done, that kind of fly under the radar, when I look at them, I think, wow, this is actually very well done, because it's paying homage to the original story, but it's kind of standing on its own, and maybe even sometimes looking at a critical eye with the original story, whereas some of them are just kind of like, you know, going to the candy store and shoving everything in your pockets at once.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of fun, and it makes you laugh, and it makes you like think about all these funny, silly memories, but it's not really commenting on it, like, or making you really think about it. It's just kind of like, ha ha, remember this, remember this, remember this.
Yeah, it's eye candy and fan service kind of thing.
And I mean, I wasn't even alive at the time that this movie was set, and obviously I wasn't even alive during the time the original one was set either. But you can really tell that movies like this are aimed at our generation specifically because, like you said, the first one that came out in the 80s is really Christmas from a child's point of view. And like he says, you know, the time which the entire kid year revolved. And this one is obviously set with Ralphie being a parent. And he's kind of like trying to recapture the magic of his childhood, not just for himself, but for his children too. And that's very similar to the way I felt when I watched the latest Little Women movie, because I felt like all the versions of Little Women I had seen up to that point were like the story of these 4 girls' childhood. But this one that came out was a lot different because it started with all of them as adults, and the scenes of them, you know, those really touchstone scenes of Christmas and like Amy falling through the ice and all of that, those were told in like a flashback form. So it was really obvious that it was aimed at people my age who had watched the 90s one as little girls, and now we're watching it as women and thinking like, okay, instead of telling us the story of our childhood, we're going to tell you how we became these women. Like, these are the experiences that shaped us, and that's kind of what this movie's doing.
That's what I mean, sort of. Like, in the first movie, Little Women, I'm just saying, like, what if they called it girl, like little girls? It wouldn't make sense. So they picked women, so it makes more sense. And there's also like a Christmas story. Christmas, his brother lives in Mexico
or India. He's living in India. Yeah, the other side of the world. He's a world traveler. We get from him. We'll talk about him in just a moment or two. This movie, just like the most recent Little Women, uses flashback. I mean, the Little Women, and you know, so it's like that's something else I think speaks to our generation, the late Gen X, early millennial way of storytelling. We're all about flashbacks. Like that's all pretty much most of our conversations and our media. You were just mentioning about, what else would a reboot be but an extended flashback? We rely on that. And the original A Christmas Story doesn't have flashback. They have dream sequences. They have him daydreaming. They have fantasy, things like that. But they don't have actual, scenes to show you, to, bring you back to memories. Because the whole thing is a memory. That's why it has like that fuzzy feeling to it, whereas this one has memories within the memories.
Well, and plus Ralphie is like 9 years old in that story, so even though that entire story we understand is a flashback with Gene Shepard narrating, within that flashback there wouldn't be other flashbacks because he's a kid. Kids don't have flashbacks really.
Well, actually we have one right here. Do you have flashbacks to earlier in life, like last week, or
even if there are technical flashbacks, it doesn't evoke that nostalgia that you have when you flashback as an adult.
Which begs the question, because Peter Billingsley is narrating this one, and he does his best Gene Shepard. I wonder if he's spent his entire adult life trying to make his voice sound like Gene Shepard so that, the original movie checks out. Like, oh, yeah, that is him. But he is, like, what time period is he narrating this story from? Is it from 2022, which would make him close to about 80 years old? Or is it, it's 1975 and he's talking about 2 years before? It's a hard one to, nail down, and that's what adds even more kind of confusion to the whole idea of, who is this for and all that. Where does it land on the timeline? You mentioned already who made it, and I'm not sure the exact director. I know that Vince Vaughn was involved in producing it, and so was Peter Billingsley. And the rest of the cast, like you said, so much of the original cast, especially the kids, are back. And that's, like, to me, kind of the signal of this is the legitimate one. That A Christmas Story 2, not legitimate. That came out straight to DVD. It has, Marv from Home Alone as the dad, which doesn't quite work. And, it's like they just tried really hard to ride on the bandwagon of how good the movie was and how much fun people had with it. But this is like the legitimate, real one.
Well, they're even still, like, right now we have the movie on mute and we're watching it, and it's the scene where Ralphie's imagining, like the Western theme, kind of like the old blue.
Yeah.
But it's with the snowball fight, and I love this sequence so much, not just because it's funny, but because it shows that, like, he never outgrew that kind of childhood imagination. Like, when he's young, he fantasizes about saving his family, like, on the frontier, and it's like he's always kind of had that imagination, and even now as an adult with his own kids, he still has it. Mm-hmm. And it's not quite as noticeable as in the original one, but they do still kind of have that fuzziness around the edges, almost like you're looking through the aperture of an old camera.
Right.
And it's, like I said, it's not quite as obvious, but this movie kind of like the Christmas Story has that very fuzzy look, kind of like what you would imagine people looked, watched films like in the 1940s before they were all colorized and digitized. They did have kind of a fuzzy look to them. This movie does have kind of a look of the 70s, like all the colors they use, obviously, like avocado.
It does have like that.
Mustard yellows have, that's just their choices in the set design and costumes and everything.
And the filter is very.
I think that's what I was going to say. Like,
yellowish.
The filter is just, which
I
makes
love.
it look very 70s.
I think that's great, and that they did that. I noticed in that dream sequence that he just was having, the fantasy sequence, that the tumbleweed was actually intentionally on like a wire. And I never noticed that I don't know if they do that in the original movie, where it's like almost him admitting right away that in order for this to happen, it would have to be like staged, like somebody, you'd have to have somebody off to the side pulling the tumbleweed, to the end. John, you noticed something in the opening of the movie that you get a little glimpse of, Ralphie's story since the original movie, that story. What was some of the portraits that you saw that stuck out to you with Ralphie?
I saw one. I guess he was into military or something. I guess it's the time of black and white because it was in black and white.
Yeah. So if the
I mean, like, even in this story, like the elves are the same and stuff.
Yeah, they go to Higbee's. That's where they are right now. So they return to the scene of his, probably most traumatic moment with Santa Claus, where Santa Claus takes his boot to his forehead and pushes him down the slide, and he even warns his own kid, don't get kicked in the head by Santa.
Well, I was just about to say that I'm really glad that they didn't do they don't do too many flashbacks. They do a couple throughout this movie just to kind of remind you.
Yeah.
And I think to emphasize the fact that they did get almost all the original cast back. But I'm really glad that they didn't do a flashback for that scene because we don't need it. Everybody knows that. If they've seen that movie, everybody knows it. So I like that they kind of showed some restraint, and he just kind of says that thing like, don't let Santa kick you in the head, and everybody else that doesn't know is kind of confused. It's like kind of a wink to the viewer, like Ralphie knows what it is and we know what it is, but nobody else that heard it knows what he's talking about.
What's kind of funny is that everything else around this town that he's in has developed into the 70s, but Higbee's looks pretty much the same as where we left it in the original, which makes you wonder if it's meant to be kind of like his version of Higbee's. Oh, there's Raggedy Ann. We just saw.
Well, it almost kind of reminds me of the way that like malls would look when I was young. Like, I'm sure that they did update some of the decorations, but I remember thinking some of the decorations looked like they had been around for a long time. Yeah, they pull them out. And exactly. So, I mean, maybe it's not supposed to look like it's in the 70s necessarily because department stores probably don't replace their decorations every year. They were probably pulling out the same ones for decades. So, I mean, it's romanticized, obviously, but it's also almost kind of super realistic. Like, of course it wouldn't look super 70s because they're probably 10 years old at this point at least.
I think the treatment that they give the 70s in this, I was just actually talking to guest last night for a future episode about Saturday Night Fever, which is a product of the 70s. So, of course, it's going to be accurate as far as depicted. But I think for a while, probably, and I mentioned this last night with him, that between the 80s and the 90s, there was a lot of kind of poking fun at the 70s, you know, like making them seem overly ridiculous, like gigantic collars everywhere and bell bottoms, and everyone
and that,
looked like
kind of funk noise, like every time someone walked, like bam, bam, bam.
Yeah, just make it seem like one big, disco was the entire country. And I think this gives a much more honest look at the 70s, where, and it's such a touchy thing with a period movie, is that the temptation, I think, is there, especially for the art director, to go all in and make it look like
Ralphie's wearing some ridiculous outfit.
Yeah, and like Elton John
powder
glasses,
blue suit or something,
and instead, he's just the way he's dressed and his hairstyle and everything. Really, the only thing that's like really 70s would be like his sideburns and glasses, but even those are just extensions of his life. And he represents, therefore, because
I guess now that you say that, though, they did kind of update the elf costumes a little bit, because if you look at the elves that are working with Santa, they do have some pretty big collars, which I don't remember them quite looking like that in the original one. So I guess maybe, they would have updated them things a little bit, but...
If we have to twist our arms, we can go back and watch the original and compare, right? We might have to, go back to that one. It's... One thing that's unique about the original movie and this one, is the age group that Ralphie and his friends represent, and that would be the silent generation. We get a lot of baby boomer stuff because that's a huge generation of people, and for most of the last 30 years or so, media has been dominated by the boomers. You think about another flashback show, the Wonder Years, was very much geared towards the later boomers and the early Gen Xers, but the silent generation doesn't get a lot of recognition in media, and partly because they were a much smaller group compared to the boomers.
I was going to say, could you define what the silent generation is? They were born late 20s through up until World War II, and like through World War II. So the boomers would be post World War II onwards. So they're like the preceding generation. And of course, during the Great Depression, not a lot of people were looking to have lots of kids. When financial security was iffy, it wasn't like they were looking to have gigantic families all the time. And so it's actually, a pretty small portion of the demographic. So to see one of their stories portrayed in modern media is a bit unique, because we're so familiar with either boomer stories, from their youth and their growing up, or Gen X / millennial, like all those Gen X, Gen Y.
The flashback shows are very 90s centric now, or with Stranger Things goes back to the 80s. This one, because it's set in the 70s, is like, that also takes you by surprise, because it would be so easy just to pick up where, set it in 1983 when the original movie comes out, but they don't take the bait on that one. We're still trying to figure out, John, you were trying to figure out what the egg in the where do they put it, the carburetor or something, or the radiator, what that is. We'll have to look that up sometime, won't we?
Yeah.
I shouldn't just go putting my eggs into radiators, right?
Yeah.
Not sure if I could find a radiator in my car. I don't know what it looks like.
I was going to say, I think that it was really smart of them not to set it in the 80s, because they're really getting a much wider audience this way, because not only are they tapping into people our age who watched this, ad nauseum in the 80s and then early 90s, of course, either in the theater, I'm not quite that old, but either in the theater, people that saw it originally that way. Obviously, like I said, the TBS 24-hour broadcast. I remember having a VHS copy of it that I'd watch. I had a DVD copy of it. So it's not just people our age, but it's people our parents' age, too, who watched it with us. I mean, on Christmas Day in my house, this was on all the time. I remember my dad, who doesn't really like many movies or TV shows at all. He always enjoyed this movie because of the Red Ryder BB gun aspect. So by not setting it in the 80s, they're kind of widening their audience and even kind of speaking to people like our parents' age, because my parents graduated high school in the 70s, so they're not quite as old as Ralphie's character would be,
they recognize
remember
this world
the 70s,
a little bit more,
and you know, they became young parents not long after the 70s. So
it is a pretty wide scoping era, and that is another important factor of it. It's always going to get comparisons to It's a Wonderful Life. I think when I was talking to Ernie, the tour guide at the Christmas Story House, he brought that movie up because this film eventually took the place of It's a Wonderful Life for a lot of people as far as the standard viewing for Christmas. And both movies, similar to each other, did not do well in the theater when they first came out. They were not critically acclaimed right away. And I think a Christmas themed movie has trouble doing that because it's really acceptable only one time of the year to actually put it in the theater. It'd be really weird to release a Christmas movie in April or in the summertime. It needs to be December. And
well, I was gonna say, wasn't A Christmas Story like actually released before Christmas in the theaters?
Yeah, well, probably a few, like October maybe.
Yeah, I seem to remember reading something like that.
Late October.
They didn't want it to compete with something else, or I feel like, I don't know it off the top of my head, but
I think, because as much as people love Christmas, it's kind of a narrow time of the year. Like in our household, Dawn, do we watch Christmas movies a lot?
Yeah.
Like every night, right? What's some of your favorite ones that we watch?
I guess, I kind of like all of them, sort of. Home Alone 2 sometimes.
You like the original Home Alone?
Yeah.
And you like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation?
Sort of.
Todd. Well, that one kind of reminds me of the title of this one. It's like National Lampoon, just kind of got stamped on top of so many different stories, and it's their Christmas movie, and so this one is like a Christmas story, Christmas. But going back to the idea of when you can watch them, you can put a movie out in the theater, a Christmas movie in October, even November. Not a lot of people are going to be really in the mood just yet. It's it's like a 1 month span that most people are like, yes, I want Christmas all around me. I don't want to, have it before Thanksgiving, and I don't want it after New Year's. Like Christmas is very narrow. So both of those movies didn't fit into that when they first came out, but thanks to being replayed over and over again, and this one even more so than It's a Wonderful Life, because it had VHS and then eventually DVD, and it had TBS, and before that TNT. This is all rhyming. We could get just part of our life over and over again. And you're right, it was, our parents loved it because it reminded them of their youth, and or at least the idealized version of their youth, and we loved it because it was like I know personally the reason I love A Christmas Story is because it was just so rich and colorful to look at. Every scene had something really great in it. It was just great storytelling. I was always a little bit nervous about certain scenes, like the kid getting his tongue stuck to the pole always kind of freaked me out. But as I've gotten older, I've just appreciated so much the care that went into it to make it look authentic.
Well, because, like you've said before, for the longest time, it was really difficult for us to pinpoint the exact year of that movie, because you just assume it's sometime between the 1930s and the early 1950s. Because remember when, people just listened to the radio, and remember when, kids just went outside for hours and just played with each other, and remember, it's just all of that. So it didn't,
Yeah, it's like a timeless. It's just the like you said, the past kind of generalized. I know that if you're listening to this you listen to the first half where Ernie was saying that he and a number of other staff at the Christmas Story House have actually studied the movie and the artifacts that they used, or the pieces that they used for different set pieces and stuff, and narrowed down the exact year.
Oh yeah, and I've scoured it myself, just out of curiosity. Like, I think when they show the Look magazine, I think it shows the year if you zoom in and stuff. And I mean, I did that just to kind of like satisfy my own curiosity, but I mean, ultimately it doesn't really matter what the year is.
Right. I think we've hit on some of the next questions just by talking with the maker's role or status in society. By having the original cast put back in there, they've found their way into our hearts. Peter Billingsley is not, he didn't really go on to do much more than A Christmas Story, as far as in front of the camera. He did a lot of stuff behind the camera as he grew up into an adult, and he had some friends, like, wasn't Jason Hervey from the Wonder Years one of his best friends or something?
So.
And I know that
which is kind of funny because there's like a weird connection, because Jason Hervey being Wayne on the Wonder Years, and the Wonder Years, flashback, the adult voice of Kevin is narrated by Daniel Stern. Daniel Stern plays My Old Man in A Christmas Story too. So there's like a really weird...
It's a weird Wonder Years...
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon kind of thing
of the universe
going on there.
And I feel like those, kind of connections exist plenty of times throughout, Hollywood, especially behind the scenes kind of things. Like they... what we see on our screens are just ultimately a few hours of their life, put together, and they have so much other connections that they make. But his involvement in this, I think, is what elevates it so much more.
Peter Billingsley is pretty iconic, not just because he was, Ralphie Parker in A Christmas Story, but just his face was always so recognizable. I mean, he had those giant blue eyes that were like magnified with those, Coke bottle glasses. And particularly that scene, where Santa kind of kicks him in the head.
Yeah.
You just think about that and you look at his smile and his giant eyes, and he still has that same look in his
crooked
face.
Smile, yeah. When he's...
So, I mean... That's why nobody else can play that character, because nobody else can obviously mimic that. And even though he's an adult now, he still has the same, like I love the part when his brother calls and he's kind of messing with his brother, and after he hangs up, he does that that little laugh, because it's very like older brother-ish.
Yeah.
It's like...
It's the same laugh from the original movie.
Exactly. Like, ha ha ha, I got him. And he's got that like little devilish smile, like, like the sibling rivalry never quite went away, even though they're on good terms and everything, obviously, but they still kind of enjoy picking at each other.
Yeah.
And
that also kind of ties things together. I feel like they make these movies, and especially this one, just going back to the It's a Wonderful Life comparison, because that never had a sequel. The closest thing to a sequel to it would be the re-release, the colorized VHS, which we talked about last year as a primary source, by the way. If you want to listen to that, go back to about a year ago. Whereas this, like we said, has several sequels. It's just kind of the nature of the time period that, we can't get enough. We want more and more and more. And, therefore, this version comes out with 40 years of that, people analyzing it like we are right now, people talking about their favorite parts, comparing it to other stories and contrasting it, which makes, to me, it's no wonder that by the end of the movie, it kind of comes together like It's a Wonderful Life. People coming over to the house to support Ralphie. He thinks that, because he gives himself an ultimatum, like a lot of these movies. It's kind of getting cliche now. He's a writer, a wannabe writer. And he's apparently given himself a whole year to try to figure that out and become, doing it as a career. And then he gets his last rejection and he's down and out and he decides not to do it anymore. But then they find out that his obituary for his dad is actually published as like a feature story in the local newspaper, and everybody's coming by, to give him their well wishes and, to celebrate him, including his brother, which, just like It's in a Wonderful Life, does a surprise visit from afar. Like, he arrives from overseas and everybody's happy to see him, but it just, I can't get over how much that scene really resembles it. And what we're watching right now is that's Flick, right? Or Schwartz. I forget.
That's Schwartz.
That's Schwartz, right? I always mix them up. He's about to go down the big toboggan, or it looks like
big military installation.
Yeah, and as a dare, and I love the way the scene opens and closes, or the last scene. They use the same technique as in the first movie, where it's like sped up, almost like, and what do they call it with the window, like the circle opens and closes.
Well, like I said, it always just kind of reminded me of like adjusting the aperture on a camera,
right? And
like making it smaller or wider.
And it's almost like silent picture kind of motion right at that scene when Flick puts a sign on the door, and then they cut to this scene. So this might be getting a little bit too deep, but if you notice, whenever Flick has a sign on the door of his bar, it's on a paper plate, which is like, okay, fine. In a bar, obviously, they would write it on a paper plate. But the paper plate matches that circle aperture kind of white. Because if it was just like a square note, it wouldn't look quite as good. But because you have that circle, like getting smaller and smaller and smaller around the note, it makes sense that the note is also a circle. And it might go one step further into saying that Ralphie has a lot on his plate with this movie, and one thing after another keeps showing up to remind him of that. And a lot of times it's outside of Flick's bar that he finds out that he has, in fact, a lot on his plate to be dealing with. Last couple questions here. I think we covered the intended audience pretty well, but before that is, where was it made and what locations are associated with it? I was completely surprised when I was talking to Ernie about this, and he said not a single scene from this movie was filmed in Cleveland like the original movie was, because I swore when they pulled around the corner and you see his house on Cleveland Street that was the house that they've turned into a museum.
Which we've been to. We've been to it twice, but we only went inside once. The second time we didn't have enough time, so we just took pictures outside.
But didn't it look like that street, like in this movie?
It does. I was completely shocked when you told me that, because I thought for sure they at least did the exterior shots.
He said it was that's Hollywood magic for you, that they're able to replicate it. I think that there's a lot of care involved in this, and you can see it, that everybody from the top down, the writer, the director, all the producers, everybody in it really cares about the movie, the original one, and wants to do it justice. They want to make sure that they're serving it properly, is extending the story, and then not just extending the story, but wrapping it around. I think that's such an important thing that they did, instead of just like with so many of those reboots and revisiting and sequels and prequels and stuff, where it seems like they're just trying to coast on the story of the original one and the excitement of it. This one seems to be going out of its way to make sure that it matches up with the original, does the original one the justice it deserves, and then brings it all home, at the very end. As far as the locations go, though, I lost my train of thought. I'll have to edit that out. All right. I think we've covered pretty well the ideas and behavior that this conveys, because, that's really where we started with this, that it's all about nostalgia, but at the same time, just making sure we get a good quality Christmas story. How would you rank this as far as, like, if this movie, you knew nothing about the original, and I think it assumes some of the audience doesn't know the original, that's why they do the flashbacks here and there.
Well, I guess that's possible, because I think that people our age are obviously going to know the original, but I mean, like working in the school, it seems like every year there's fewer and fewer kids who have watched A Christmas Story. So I think they're probably assuming that people our age are definitely watching it with the knowledge of the first movie, but that maybe there's kids around that have never really watched it, or maybe never really paid attention to it and don't know the lines by heart and stuff.
Right. So they have to get that back. Where would you rank A Christmas Story Christmas, though, on your hierarchy of Christmas movies? Like this one, is it going to hit the rotation?
For me, anyways, I feel like it's, we've already rewatched it several times. I feel like for me, it's going to be pretty high up there, along with watching A Christmas Story. Like, I'll watch A Christmas Story and maybe a couple of times, and then I'll be like, all right, I'm in the mood for A Christmas Story Christmas now. I watch Home Alone a couple of times, and then I'm like, all right, I want to see Home Alone 2 now.
Yeah.
This is better than Home Alone 2, but it's just kind of that idea of like, all right, that was the first one, and I've, done its duty by, watching it a couple of times, but I'm kind of in the mood to, like, watch how these characters, went on.
Right. And it does a good job of fulfilling that. So, thank you, Tie-Dyed Librarian, for joining me again. And thank you, John, if you want to shout from your...
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And hopefully all of you have enjoyed listening to this little addendum to my A Christmas Story House episode. We'll talk to you next time. I've been having a blast hosting another season of the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. Don't worry, there's still another baker's dozen episodes still to go when we come back in February. In the meantime, keep up on the show on the Facebook page, on YouTube, and on Instagram with regular posts and a few live videos over the next few weeks. Until then, I hope you have the happiest of holidays and a wonderful start to 2023.